We have a problem. Junior is a Republican.
Republican?
Yes!
No!
Yes!
No!
Yes!
No!
Yes!
We don't do that, Dre! We are compassionate liberals who believe in tolerance, acceptance, open...
Yeah, whatever, but we're black, all right? That's all that matters. We're black.
Welcome. You are listening to the Invisible Black Elephants podcast, where we discuss politics, faith, family, and other conservative principles from an African American perspective. We are turning the current GOP back to the Party of Lincoln, one show at a time.
Black Republicans, yes, they do exist.
Hey guys, welcome. Thank you for joining us. This is the Invisible Black Elephants podcast. I am your host, Jason Waller. I go by the name Elder J online, and I am so excited that you guys decided to come and listen to the podcast. I'm asking that you would subscribe to the podcast, follow the podcast, and just to get our numbers up. This podcast has been a dream of mine for a little while now, and I'm just excited to be able to launch it. Before we get started, since this is my first episode, I do want to give a shout out to those people who helped me to get this podcast up and running. I don't want to call out any names because there were many people that helped. They donated financially to help me. They've given me words of encouragement that pushed me to just jump and take a leap. And I thank you guys greatly for being able to push me to be able to do this. It's been a long time coming, and I'm so happy. Thank my wife. She's been always so supportive of me, and I'm just thankful for God giving me her to me. And so, like I said, guys, this is my first episode. Please don't be too hard on me. Still getting used to hearing myself in this manner, but it's going to be all good. So I want to first talk about the podcast itself and where this podcast is going to be going, the direction that it's going to be going. And I think the best way to do that is to explain the name. Within the name, it talks a lot about the perspective and the trajectory of the podcast and where I think where I want to focus this podcast. And then you can see for yourselves, is this something that you want to follow, something that you not interested into, or something that you would like to support. So let's start with the name, Invisible Black Elephants Podcast. Okay, so Invisible Black and Elephants. The easiest thing to start off there is we're going to talk about the elephants. The elephant is the mascot and the logo that is used for the current Republican Party. So that immediately tells you, if we're talking about a political podcast, which perspective we're coming from here on this podcast. We are a podcast that is right of center. And so for people who don't know political terms, this is definitely going to be the podcast for you because we're going to be teaching a lot of things and explaining a lot of political jargon that you may hear on the news or hear around, and you may not know exactly what those things mean. But I like to tell people who's just starting, and this is very, very, very simplistic, so don't take this too far, but this is a good way to be able to understand exactly how far we're, or where we're coming from. If you just drew a line on a straight sheet of paper, a straight line, and if you drew a line in the center of that line, everything to the left of that line is going to be your left-leaning politics. You're going to find that being the Democrats, or if you want to talk about third parties, that'll be like the Green Party. Those will be left-leaning politics. Then you have to the right of that center, the right-leaning politics, dominated by primarily the Republican Party. And if you want to talk about third parties, you also would have your Libertarian Party on that side. And on both the right and the left, you'll have independents, some who are independent, who are left-leaning, and there are some who are independent who are right-leaning. Now, that's just a very, very simplistic perspective, but with this podcast, the ideology that we come from are right of center. So that's going to be right-leaning independents, Republicans, and libertarians. And it's also is going to be for those who may be left-leaning, but they want to get a different perspective. They want to know exactly how the right side thinks about certain things. So that's where the elephants come from. Now let's discuss the invisible black part. So, okay, of course it's black because I am black and this podcast is coming from a African American perspective. So that's where we get the black. But the invisible is actually the adjective that's modifying black. And so when we talk about being invisible, from my perspective, when I was creating this podcast, I looked at it from two different ways. So invisible from the black side, because this is a podcast that's dealing with blacks who are conservative. When you look at the political climate and landscape among African Americans, most African Americans vote Democrat. So that would be left leaning and from the left perspective. So because of that gap there, to say that there's a black Republican, like that is something that's seen as so minute. It's so strange to hear that when you're in the black community. That's something that we don't even, like, it's not even a question. You even think about times where blacks have these like go rock the vote, or please go out and vote, or you're here on these award shows, these black award shows, TV One and BET. They'll say, you guys, we need to go vote. We need to do something about what's going on right now. We need to go vote. They don't ever tell you we need to go vote Democrat. They just say go vote, because to blacks talking to other blacks, that already means black, you need to go vote for Democrats. So because the black Republican, the black conservative is such a small number within our community that it's just ignored. It's like it doesn't even exist. So that's kind of where I got the one of the reasons why I wanted to use the terminology of invisible. It's also, when you do find a black Republican, we're already from other blacks, we're already dismissed. A lot of times it's not about, okay, let's find out why you are. It's just a lot of times we get accused of we just get called names: coons, Uncle Toms, sellouts, traitors to our race. And because of the stance that we have, so we're pushed to the side. We are anathema. We are, seen at in the community as heretics, just because we hold to this perspective. So that's another reason why I say that we're invisible. Now, on the flip side of that, when you think of whites who are Republicans, they also, when they see black people who are Republicans, because we're such a small minority in the Republican Party, when you look at the landscape and when you see Republicans, you often do not see us. We're just invisible. If you go to any Republican function, Republican fundraiser, or Republican meeting, go into the room and you can count us on, if you find any of us in there, you can probably count us on one hand. Depending on the size, you may be able to count us on two, but it's still not substantial. If you just did a quick glance in the room, you wouldn't even notice that we were there. Again, and because of that, white Republicans do not have to even acknowledge us or even try to really get our vote. So they can actually ignore us because we're not being seen as being a substantial element in the movement. So on one side, we're getting pushed to the side and we're getting ostracized from our own community who identify with us ethnically. But then on the other side, we're being ignored by we're often being ignored by those who identify with us politically. So we find ourselves somewhere in the middle in some kind of limbo. So that's why I wanted to come up with this name, Invisible Black Elephants. And that's what it stands for, what the perspective that it's coming from. What's it like to be in this zone where you're not accepted in your community and often ignored by those who you identify with politically. And so this podcast is going to be geared towards us, trying to get more of us in the Republican and conservative movement so that we can not be ignored any longer, but also so that it's not looked at so weird that you find one of us. All right, people. So now that you have the name down, you understand where we're coming from and how we got the name. Now we're going to talk about the focus of the show. What we're going to be doing is primarily highlighting Black conservatives and conservative values. So we're definitely going to be talking about things that matter to conservatives, but we're also going to be highlighting, like I said, individual Black conservatives because it's so rare to find us, right? Because we're invisible. I want to be able to have some interviews and conversations with everyday Black conservatives and, speak to them about and talk to them about their experience and how it's been being a Black conservative, how they've been treated in the community, those type of things. I want to be able to bring that message out. Because we're such a small community, when you're able to have these kind of conversations, it does build camaraderie, and it does allow for those of us who are hiding in the shadows to feel like it's okay to actually come out. And so I definitely want to do that going forward. Another part of the podcast that's going to be extremely important to me and very vital to this particular platform is to the promotion of Black Republicans who are actually running for office. This is going to be super important. Most of the times I'm having conversations with people, a lot of times we always say, if you have a conversation with a Black person, one of the things they say, they don't see themselves represented in the party, the Republican Party. And a lot of times it's not just, like I said, at going to the meetings and stuff, it's actually in the elected officials. And some of that is because we just don't vote for Republicans, but also some of that is, when we have people of color who are running for office, a lot of times because of where they're coming from, where the town or city that they're in, they don't get as much support from the Republican Party. And because of that, they may not have the funds for marketing, and they may not have a way to really get their message out effectively. I want to lend this platform as a way for people to go in and at least have a record of some interviews where they stand on certain issues, so that, if they don't have anything else, if somebody wanted to say, where do you stand on some values, or where can I hear about your platform, they can at least have a place where they had a record of an interview where they were answering some of these questions. And so I want to lend my platform, even though it's very small. Of course, I got a long-term goal, right? So I expect us to grow, and I expect us to have a good listenership and following, so that they can at least get their message out. So if you are someone who is running for office, or somebody who is running for office, mayor, city council, state legislature, Congress, and you have an opportunity to give a shout out to the podcast, let us know who you are. We can set up an interview. You can send us an email at invisibleblackelephants@gmail.com. We can set something up, but that's definitely what's going to be very important for me going forward in 2020 and beyond. We're also going to be doing interviews with experts on those particular conservative values that we're talking about. So when you're talking about strong families and entrepreneurship and fiscal responsibility and home ownership and school choice and prison reform, all of these things are within the conservative framework and the values that we hold to and that we hold dear. We're going to be trying to talk to experts who deal in those areas. Now, when we talk to these experts, some of them may not even vote Republican. And I think I made this statement earlier, but many black individuals are conservative by nature, but their vote may not go that way. But if they're promoting conservative values, we're going to be wanting to have that conversation, because even though they don't vote that way, they don't even, a lot of people don't even know it. They're promoting what they're promoting are conservative values. So we're going to definitely have discussions with people who are experts or who have some success in those various conservative spaces. We're also going to be having discussions with non-conservatives. So I don't want to say debates necessarily, but we will be having some kind of conversations just so each side can actually get an accurate representation of the other. A lot of times, Democrats are getting their information about Republicans from Democrats. And a lot of times, Republicans are getting their information from Democrats from Republicans, instead of actually talking to one another and seeing if there is some disagreement, where the disagreement arises, and if there's some reconciliation or some middle ground that can be held. So having a discussion is how those things are going to be, how we're going to flourish in going forward. And that's going to be a very, very important part of this particular podcast. So we're going to take a quick break. And when we come back from the break, we're going to discuss, and I'm going to talk to you guys a little bit about myself. How did I get to this point? How did I become a Black Republican? How did I come outspoken Black Republican? And how, just a little bit about me. I feel that if you're going to be on this journey with me and listening to this podcast, you should at least know a little bit about the host. How did I get to this place? We're back. You guys came back. You might as well finish out the show with me. I'm going to tell you guys a little bit about myself. Before I get into that, there's some things I definitely wanted to clear up and to discuss before we go any further. I want to first talk about identity politics really quickly, because the first half you've been hearing me talk about Black conservatives, Black, African American, and all this good stuff. And the show itself having to deal with Black elephants. I want you guys to, some of you might be getting scared, like, are we getting into identity politics here? And I am definitely going to do a show based on this topic alone, because I think it's very important. And on this particular podcast, we're not going to be engaging in what I look at as identity politics, but we're going to be talking about what I call strategic outreach. Okay. So let me just give a quick little definition of how I see and what I see as identity politics, and what I see the differences is, and what we're going to be focusing on in this podcast, and what is important, and what I think the GOP should actually engage in. So identity politics, when you think about identity politics, think about like the intro to this show. I had a clip from the show Blackish, and part of that show, and if you watch that whole episode, it was talking about when you bring up Black people being Republicans, it's like, what? You can't be a Republican because you are Black. See, when you identify political party with your race, or with a gender, or with a sexual preference, that's when you're engaging in identity politics. Okay, so identity politics says you are Black, so therefore you must vote Democrat. Okay, that's identity politics. What I'm talking about is strategic outreach. That's saying you have a base of people right now. The Republicans, when they say we're talking to our base, they are talking to a specific group of people when they say a base. What we're talking about here is expanding what you say your base is. So, for example, I've mentioned it several times already. If Black people are naturally conservative for the most part, Most of us will hold to some values. You walk up to a black person and just talking about actual conservative values, and you don't use the words Republican, you don't use the word conservative, you don't talk about anybody like Donald Trump or anything like that, many of them will agree with everything that you're saying. As soon as you say the word Republican, then they start running, you say the word conservative, and then it's like, oh my God. Well, I'm saying if you already have a group of people who identify with your policies, most of us are okay with your values and policies, it makes sense to add and to target and to strategically promote and market to that group of people to shore up your base. If the GOP is only focused on white voters, which is what they are now, because that's what makes up the majority of the base of the Republican Party. And technically today Republicans can win without substantial minority vote. Well, we already know, like I think in 2045, I think they're saying that white people are going to be a minority in this country compared to the population of all the other minorities in the country. That's based on birth rates, that's based on immigration and things of that nature. If that's the case, it makes sense for you to strategically grow your base and to go into those areas so you can expand yourself. And there's going to be a bunch of black people who agree with your message. You just have to market it correctly. There's going to be a bunch of Latinos who agree with your message. You just have to market it correctly. So that's what we're engaging in. We're engaging in strategic outreach, not identity politics. I do not believe all black people should vote for Republicans. Actually, I believe that you should just vote your values. Here's the thing. I know African-American voters who are pro-life, pro-gun, they're Christian, they're not down with this whole progressive LGBTQ agenda that's going on right now, yet they will vote overwhelmingly Democrat, even though most of the values that they believe are on the Republican side. And there's a reason for that. We're going to get into all of that stuff later, how blacks became to vote primarily Democrat and all that good stuff. We're going to learn about all that later. But I'm saying if you already hold those values, you might as well come on this side and vote those values. And let's try to change this party so that it doesn't have the same stigma and the veneer that it currently has that is off-putting to other people. So that's all I'm saying. So the GOP currently does have blind spots, and we'll be able, if you diversify the base, diversify your pot, it actually strengthens the whole party altogether, because it brings forth more ideas and it brings forth more discussions that can be held within the party and things of that nature. So that's all I'm trying to do. And so in my intro, I said we're trying to make the GOP turn it back to the party of Lincoln. When Lincoln was the first Republican president, the party itself back then was a radical party. It was a party of transformation. It was not a party that's so stagnant. It wasn't a party that was not moving and shaking. And I think at this stage of the game, all the moving and shaking that's done in politics is done by the progressive wing, which is on the left side. But their moving and shaking, I believe, is damaging to the country. We have a message that can sustain the country, that can bring more people out of poverty, that can bring more people out of dire situations. We have a message that'll be better for the country as a whole. So that's what I'm trying to promote, to get us back to that party of Lincoln, not the party of being stagnant. And we just have to market it better. So that's what I'm engaging in here. We're not talking about if you're black, you need to be a Republican. No, if you're conservative, you need to vote conservatively. That's what we're talking about. So, and again, this party is not, I'm not saying the Republican Party is the perfect party. I'm saying that the party needs to change, but it'll help change the party when the party gets more diverse. Once the party becomes more and more diverse, then you bring more and more ideas, and then the party it's actually better to change in that right direction. So I wanted to clear that up. So when we talk about having guests on and everything like that, it's not like I'm not going to have anybody that may be white who's going to come and be a guest on the show or something like that. No, it's not. We're not getting into all that kind of stuff. That we keep that stuff on the left side. On the right side, we love everybody. We're all Americans and we're all trying to push things forward. However, we have to realize and recognize that as the GOP stands today, if it keeps doing what it's doing now, it will not survive. Now, let's talk about myself a little bit. So I am a 40, as the time of this recording, I'm 40 years old. I am a husband. I'm a father of two. The reason why I have the title Elder J I used to live in Pennsylvania, and I was for about 10 years an assistant pastor, an elder at a church, and I'm no longer at that particular congregation, and so I don't hold that title anymore, but that name, Elder J, kind of stuck with me. Currently, I'm still in school. I am getting a seminary degree, Master's of Divinity. So that is, I also work full time. So having a family, working full time, so going to school full time, it's a lot on my plate. So these podcasts, I'm not going to be having a podcast every single day. I'm going to put out as many as I can. I'm going to try to get out a podcast once a week. I'm going to try to keep the podcast to about a half an hour or so, except there are times when we have guests on, then, it may run an hour and a half or something like that with the guests and interviews and things of that nature. But when I come out for just a basic topic and basic talks that I'm going to be giving, I'm going to try to keep the show to about a half an hour because, schedule. That's a little bit about me. When it comes to politics, growing up, I never was into politics. Now, I was always a voter. Once I became old enough to vote, I was always a voter. I grew up watching and paying attention to the Black history stuff and recognizing that we weren't able to vote at a certain period of time. And, my ancestors, they fought for us to have that right. And so once we had that right, and once I was old enough to be able to vote, I made sure I voted in every single election that I was able to vote in. That was from the time I was able to vote. So I didn't just vote in presidential elections. I voted in all local elections. The only elections that I did not engage in were primary elections. And the reason is because I was always registered as an independent. And in a future show, we're going to talk about the advantages of registering for political parties. So I don't want to get into that now, but we're definitely going to talk about that later. So I was always registered as an independent. So I never voted in primaries, but I did vote in every other election. Now, I didn't really get into politics until Obama. Now, when Bill Clinton was in office, I kind of paid attention to him, but on a popular level. Like, he was a superstar in the Black community, so it was kind of like he was just a celebrity kind of president, but I wasn't paying attention to actual policies or anything like that. But I did know he was the president and followed him, and sometimes he would be on shows and stuff like that, and I would listen to him, and he was always a good speaker and things of that nature, but I never really paid attention into detail. When Obama was starting to run, that's when I actually got into politics, because I recognized, wait a minute, we could possibly make history here. We could possibly have a Black president. What is this? So I paid attention. I started following him. I started listening to all his talks. I started listening to things like town halls and watching debates. I never did any of that. And when he became, I started listening to some of the things he was talking about, and I was like, hey, if we get a black person in, he should be doing something for the black community. But then, you always think about, well, what can he actually do for the black community? And one talk he had, he was talking about criminal justice reform. And he was talking about how some sentences are unfair with African Americans versus other people. And, the way people are getting time and, certain drugs were weighed more heavily, and they affected one community over the other and all these other things. And I was like, wow, that's a very interesting. So I really started to pay attention to that. And so when he became president, I was like, okay, he's going to do something about this criminal justice reform, and that's going to actually help the black community. Now, I wasn't like some of these other black folk that was thinking that, because he became president, now he's going to put $500 in every black person's pocket now. Like, man, you can't do that kind of stuff. I understood that. But I thought, okay, maybe he would do something there. He did not do it. And when he first got elected, he had the Congress on his side. He had a majority of Democrats in the House and the Senate. So I was shocked that he actually didn't do more before he had as much opposition for the black people. And every time I talked to some, black folk about it, they were like, look, he's not just our president. He's the president for everybody. And I was like, I get that, but we came out in droves for the brother. He should have at least gave us something. I wasn't expecting to get a couple dollars and some checks. I was expecting him to talk about this prison reform thing. Now, in that process of me starting to look at Obama with the side eye now, I ran into an older white guy, Republican, named Ron Paul. Now, technically, Ron Paul was a libertarian. I never heard of a libertarian until I ran into this guy. And I started hearing him talk about prison reform and stuff like that, and especially surrounding issues of marijuana legalization and things of that nature. And I was like, well, this guy is saying the same stuff that Barack was saying, but he is actually he sounds like he's got some policies and stuff. So I started listening to this guy, and I started learning a lot. I started recognizing that I actually agree with a lot of what he's saying when he was putting forth his conservative message. But there was other things that he was saying that I didn't quite understand. So he made me want to study. I started to go back and I picked up the Constitution again. I started reading the Bill of Rights all over again and a lot of the other amendments to the Constitution. I started reading even some of the Federalist Papers where, sometimes they would explain why they put forth or what was the purpose of a particular amendment and what they meant when they put this amendment forth. I would go back and read, the writings of those who put forth those amendments and things like that. And I came to realize, hold up, I am actually a conservative. A lot of the stuff that this side over here, the right side, is talking about, I already agree with. And some of it was a learning curve, but a lot of it was I already agree with these things. And so that made me kind of lean that way. But what I did was I said, I still can't be a Republican because, Republicans, I'm black. You can't be a Republican. So what I did was I moved and I actually left being technically a Democrat. Even though I was a registered independent, I stopped voting Democrat in 2010. That's when I officially said, you know what, I'm on the right side now. And I registered in Pennsylvania as a libertarian. And so when I became a libertarian, I became very outspoken on voting for third parties because people were always saying, you have to vote between the lesser of two evils. And I was like, why you got to vote for the lesser of two evils? Don't you know that there's other options out there? There's the Green Party. There's the Libertarian Party. There's other parties out there. Why don't you vote for other people? And everybody would say, well, they don't have a chance to win. So what's the point? And I'm like, it doesn't matter if they have a chance to win or not. If they have your values, vote your values. So I always was saying, vote your values, even back then. And so I was like, if everybody who says they can't win decides to just say, well, whether they win or not, I'm going to vote my values, we might be able to change the landscape. And, but that message never resonated. And at this time, I was starting to be kind of outspoken, not anti-Obama, but I was kind of challenging a lot of the things that Obama was doing during this time period online. And I would always say I have a love-hate relationship with Barack Obama. And I really did. And because as a person, I thought Barack Obama was a really good guy. As far as I admired him as a man, I admired him as a husband and father. I liked the way he carried himself, his swagger, his charisma, the way he talked, the way he carried himself. I kind of liked all of that. However, I did not like his policies. So that's where I had the love-hate relationship. So even though I used to talk and challenge Barack Obama, a lot of times the people that I was friends with and everything like that, they didn't really pay me any mind because I didn't use the word Republican. I was talking about libertarian. I was talking about conservative, and I was using words that kind of like, it didn't throw up any alarms. As I began to continue to study more and more the libertarian philosophy and policies and trying to logically take them to their fullest and logical conclusion, I began to realize that I'm actually more conservative than the libertarians are. Because I'm a Christian, I guess I was a little more socially conservative in a lot of different areas than the libertarians were. And so that kind of was pushing me now back to the Republican Party. And I was like, oh my goodness, I can't believe it. I'm actually more in alignment than the Republicans. And so I was originally living in Pennsylvania 3 years ago. Well, at the time of this recording, I'm recording this in 2019. In 2016, we relocated from Pennsylvania, which is what we call a purple state. It's a state that's run sometimes by Democrats, run sometimes by Republicans. And because of that, the policies are kind of, in my opinion, kind of sane. It kind of keeps them from going too left or too right. I moved in 2016 to New Jersey. Now, New Jersey is a super liberal state. Absolutely ridiculously crazy. Everything that California has done and is trying to do, New Jersey is like, hey, we want to do the same thing. And it wasn't until I moved to New Jersey where I actually had to live under heavy liberal policy from a statewide level that it made me realize just how conservative I really was. And so because of that, I no longer could fight it. I said, you know what? I'm just going to be who I am. And I went on and registered as a Republican. And again, I'm going to talk about what made me finally just go ahead and register as a Republican when we talk about the advantages of registering for a political party. Because when I moved here, I wasn't a libertarian. When I moved here, I was just an independent. But there was something that I could have just started voting for Republicans and still been an independent. But, we'll talk about that later. But I went on and registered as a Republican. That's when it really started getting crazy, because as the media and as the Democratic Party, who is in the forefront, those who are running for president and things like that started going more and more to the left, I started becoming more and more outspoken against those messages. And that's when it became real clear to a lot of my friends that, hold up, we actually lost Jay. Now, my voice got louder as the left began to get more insane, in my opinion. And so, but because I was a black person who's not towing this same party line and voting, and agreeing everything that the Democrats were putting forth, it began to get a little crazy. When Trump came in, this era of Trump, everything just, I don't know where we are now. Everybody has gotten crazy on both sides. Everybody is political discourse in today's age is very, very difficult. So polarizing. If you say anything about Trump, you are immediately just, if you support Trump in any way, I don't care. If he gives out $1,000 to everybody, it's going to be a problem. If he cures cancer, it's going to be an issue. So what happened was when Trump was coming in, I didn't vote for Trump originally because I was like, this guy's not really a conservative. So, I didn't vote for him. And I just thought he is on the Republican ticket, but he's not really a conservative. If he does anything, he's going to do a couple little things. He's going to probably just play the moderate role, not do anything too big, too small. And, he'll be out. He'll do his one term and be out. I didn't even think he really wanted to be president. I thought he just was, trying to show off, making a publicity stunt, and then he actually just fell into it. So I really wasn't. When he became president, I wasn't all upset. I didn't think the world was going to end or anything like that. I never really think like that. That's part of the conservative value. The conservative in me is saying, look, it doesn't matter who's in office. We have to do personal responsibility. So because he was in, I didn't fall out and cry like everybody else did around me. I just was like, okay, well, whatever. But I didn't think he was going to get my vote. But there's something about me that has always been a little contrary. If I see everybody on one side, I kind of always like to play on the other side just because everybody's all on this side. So, throughout the years since he was elected, everybody was talking about how crazy he is. Everybody was talking about how, bad he was and how he did this and how he did that. And so what I would do is just, if he did something good, I would just highlight the one good thing that he did. And everybody's like, Jason, how can you do this? How can you support Trump? And I'm like, what are you talking about? This is something he did good. It looks good. I agree with this. And that's all I was doing at first. And then I would also pay attention to the media and the way the media runs. And when you get on the right side, you automatically don't trust the media. So when you watch CNN, MSNBC, and they say something, you don't take it immediately. You say, okay, let me check that out first. And then you're always doing some background stuff and trying to figure out if what they said is actually true or not. You learn that once you become on the right side, because you realize that 90% of the media is actually for the Democrats. So because of that, you're not going to be as accepting of the news as you normally would be, as anybody else would be. So what happened was, once I started doing things like just highlighting just some of the good things that he did that I liked, I also started to point out where the media would lie. The media would lie or take something out of context, and I would just say, well, that's not really what he said. This is what he actually meant. And everybody again, oh my God, you're taking up for Trump again. And so I would just do that for fun at first, just to, get a reaction for people online. And then I started to realize there were some policies he was putting forth that I was actually really liking. And he started doing certain things that were really conservative that I was like, wow, he's actually putting forth some policies that I actually really agree with. Now, let me explain something to you. When I came over in 2010, there was a very, very big and important lesson that I learned from the Obama years. And I will always keep this. And when it comes to politics, I always put this forth. Policy over personality. That is extremely important. You're going to hear me say this on this podcast many, many, many times. Policy trumps personality any day. If you have somebody who you absolutely love, they're the best person in the world, but their policies are detrimental to your society, they have to go. Give me somebody who may be rough around the edges, but their policies work, and I'm going to vote for them every time. So when Trump was in, I didn't really care about his personality as much because I had already I'm past that, worrying about necessarily personalities. I can look at somebody's personality and say, I really don't like him. And I'm going to say this right now. Trump's personality is not my cup of tea for a president anyway. I mean, I'm not necessarily triggered by him. And when he says things, I'm like, oh my God, what's going on? The president shouldn't do all that and crying. And I don't do all that stuff. But he's necessarily not my cup of tea as far as his personality is concerned. I mean, but his policies are great. I mean, if I could take Barack Obama's personality and put it on Trump and with Trump's policies, I would be good. But if I have to weigh those things, his policies are more important to me than his personality. So I thought this guy is not going to vote. I mean, this guy is not going to govern or legislate conservatively. So he's not really going to get my vote. He's just out here biding his time, trying to do his one term so he can sit down anyway. I never thought I would vote for him. Over the years and watching all of the policies that he's put forth, certain things that he's done that I've truly agreed with, and seeing how crazy the left side of politics is going and the direction that they are heading in, that kind of pushed me into being a Trump supporter, and to the point where now he's more than likely going to get my vote in 2020, which is something that I would have never, ever, ever said or believed even a year ago. So that's just a little bit of how I came over into this way of thinking, how I became a conservative, how I got into politics, where I stand kind of currently in certain politics. And of course, we can go into detail later into future shows when we actually start talking about policy and agendas and the differences between parties and all that good stuff. We'll talk about a lot of this stuff in detail later. So hopefully you guys enjoyed this first episode, this pilot episode. You learned a little bit about me. You learned about the show. Hopefully this is something that you guys can actually get down with. I'm going to ask that if you would please subscribe to the podcast. I will try my best to get this podcast on all media platforms so that it can be reached so that you can know about it via Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. I'll even start to upload the audios to YouTube so that you can share it on that method. But you should be able to listen to the podcast on all the major podcast platforms: Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts. You should be able to hear the podcast and subscribe to us in any of those venues. But again, I want to thank you guys for your time. I'm going to get up out of here. We're going to put this show down. Thank you so much for everything. I'm going to do my best as we go further to do a better job as a host, to get better at my speaking and all that good stuff. Just be here, grow with me, share, holler it out, let your people know that we're in the building. Thank you guys for everything. I will talk to you later. Peace out. Thank you for tuning into the podcast. Please subscribe via the major podcasting providers. Also, be sure to like, comment, share, subscribe, and follow us on our social media platforms. For more information about the podcast or to schedule interviews, please email invisibleblackelements@gmail.com. God bless, and see you next time.